Hello, I'm meteorologist Pete Mangione. Welcome to another edition of Sonoran Sky Live. Today we have a very exciting topic, but here's how I will set the stage. You know, when we talk about weather forecasting, there is a lot of focus on predicting the future. The fancy computers, AI, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next week, what will happen next year. And all of this is great because, of course, people want to prepare for what is coming up in the future. However, there is no way to predict the future accurately when we have no understanding of the past, specifically in terms of what's happened in terms of rain, snowfall, because if we don't capture this data accurately, then the future data also gets messed up. So I want to bring on a very special guest this morning. His name is Noah Newman. He is one of the educational outreach coordinators of CoCoRaHS. Noah, welcome to the Sonoran Sky livecast.
Good morning, Pete. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so I just used a word that a lot of people probably don't recognize. They maybe think it's a breakfast cereal like Cocoa Puffs, but that's not what I said. I said CoCoRaHS. Can you explain what CoCoRaHS is generally and how you got involved?
Sure. So CoCoRaHS is an acronym standing for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I have been with CoCoRaHS, working for headquarters here for just over 17 years now, and the network has been operating for about 27 years.
Awesome. Okay, so the viewers will see a little map behind me. We have dots all over the United States of America, and these dots are actually volunteer weather spotters. So essentially, this CoCoRaHS network are volunteers. It could be, in the future, one of the people watching this live stream that report daily rainfall, snowfall, hail, and other types of weather, right?
Yes, every dot you see on that map is a human being with a special rain gauge set up in their backyard, and they report their 24-hour measurements to our website. You're absolutely right that these are all volunteers, but the way to do it is easy to learn, and you actually can learn as you go, and then your data are included on the map, which anyone, even if you're not, but if you're not a member, if you haven't joined CoCoRaHS, you can go to that website, you can click on that map, and you can see the different amounts that were reported by volunteers in your area.
That's awesome. And for those of you that can't quite see, yes, there are a bunch of dots in Arizona as well. So we have coverage all over the country. All right, I want to show you one of the big reasons that this network is so important. So this is actually taken from the CoCoRaHS website. And this is interesting because I'm going to zoom this way in here. So we've got a circled part of the screen here, 7.12 inches. I assume that's rainfall. So that's a rainfall report of a storm that occurred in Texas. And then notice right around the 7.12, we have a 0.007, a 0.06. So Noah, this shows you why it's so important to have coverage, because if you don't, you might actually miss a storm.
Yes, and in fact, looking at that map, you can even see that there's a 0 on that map as well. So somebody nearby reported that they got nothing. That particular event was pretty interesting in that when we saw that dot on the map, 7.12, we actually thought it was maybe a typo from the volunteer, that they were reporting 0 at 7:12 a.m. or something to that effect, or maybe 0.07 and just had a typo. But they actually, that volunteer included some notes in there, and they said all of this fell in a very short period of time. And just those notes, in fact, really helped us out. We went back to the radar. We verified that there was a single thunderstorm that formed right over that person's house, basically, and and produced 7 inches of rainfall, where everyone nearby had nothing even close to that amount.
That's amazing. And, you know, traditionally, a lot of our official rainfall reports come from airports, but of course, we don't have airports everywhere, so we need to fill in the gaps in between the airports, right?
Yes, and that is the whole point of the network, that we are filling in the gaps in between the major and official weather stations, which, as you mentioned, are typically at airports, but we don't live at airports. And so you're oftentimes watching on TV and saying, that's not what fell at my house. And that's exactly right. You could set up a approved rain gauge from Kokoraz and help us figure out exactly what did fall at your house.
That's funny, Noah, because when we are doing weather coverage during storms and we give the Sky Harbor Airport, which is the airport here in Phoenix, we give those rainfall totals, we will get sometimes interesting emails that say, hey, I don't care about Sky Harbor, I care what happened at my house. And obviously this type of network helps that situation. So the next graphic I have up, also from your website, examples of Kokoraz data users. I think this is so important. And we have, just as an example, I won't read through all of them, but the National Weather Service, hydrologists, emergency managers, city utilities, water supply, insurance adjusters. I mean, Noah, there are just so many people that rely on this data.
Yes, and it's also researchers that are producing publications that go out in journals. Um, and it's another one on that list was for mosquito control. So it's really it's precipitation data is valuable to so many people, and really it's of interest to the public. Again, you're just a regular person and want to know how much it rained in different locations. Maybe you're a farmer. It's really valuable information for you.
Absolutely. And here's another example. I have NOAA's River Forecast Center as an example of organizations that rely on this data. Talk about this. I feel like this could be really important when it comes to things like snowpack and floods and things like that.
Yes, this is extremely important. The river forecast centers use our data, not only the rainfall data that occurred over the previous 24 hours, but as you just mentioned, the snow, the water that is locked up in the snow. The river forecast centers want to know how much water is getting ready to melt into the rivers, and in certain cases might uh, go into a flood stage area. And so they are able to issue flood warnings and watches, oftentimes based on Kokoraz data.
That's so cool. And our next graphic here is it's an image of people kind of checking out their rainfall stations. Some of it looks like parents with their children. I mean, this seems like it could be a huge teaching opportunity if you're a parent and you have a child that is really interested in weather. And, you know, I was one of those children when I was young, just annoying my parents about wanting to know more about weather. I feel like this could be a great opportunity. Become a volunteer, and then you could actually measure the weather with your kids.
Yes, absolutely. We actually have a whole lot of schools that are involved. We've got teachers that set up the rain gauge, and they do usually just the weekdays. You can skip the weekend, for instance, and actually come in on a Monday and submit what's called a multi-day accumulation report. So you don't have to be home every single day. But yes, if you've got a kid and you want to get them involved, they're getting to read a real scientific instrument. They're reading to the nearest 1/100th of an inch. They're doing fractions and decimals. You go to the map, you're looking at geography, you're doing math. So it meets all sorts of educational standards, whether you're a homeschool teacher or want to get your school your kid's school involved. You can talk to a teacher about getting a rain gauge set up at the school.
I love that. And our next picture here, I kind of wanted to show how simple that you make this process, even though it might sound kind of daunting and complicated. It's really not. So on the right here, there's a picture of a cell phone and a rain gauge. So it looks like you basically allow people to measure the rain and then enter the data on an app on their phone. Looks pretty simple.
It is. It's as easy as pie. You can bring your smartphone out to your rain gauge and log into our app and submit your data right there on the spot. So that does make it quite easy for sure. There's also a website, and the website is usually better for looking at the maps and graphs and other data. But if you just want to enter your data and be done for the day, it takes you, less than 30 seconds to read your gauge and enter your data.
And I was going to do this at the end, but I want to do it now because I don't want to forget. If you're watching this live stream and you're interested in becoming a volunteer, here's the website right here, kokoraz.org. And I know, Noah, you have pretty detailed instructions on the steps that you have to take to become a volunteer.
We do. Again, the real non-negotiable is that everyone needs to have the same exact type of rain gauge. So I'm holding one here. You can get, there are links on our website where you can find vendors that sell this type of rain gauge. And that is really the only requirement to be a part of it, is that we need to be comparing apples to apples. So we need everyone to use the exact same rain gauge. And you'll notice too that this is a manual gauge. You have to read it with your eyeballs. So we do not allow the automated sensors or rain gauges out there. They can be good for certain things, but typically the manual instrument is the gold standard according to the National Weather Service.
Noah, I love that you're talking old school weather. I'm a big fan, obviously, of automation and computers, but I also love the fact that, sometimes what you see with your own eyes is sometimes the most accurate report.
You got it. So many times if you've got one of those automated weather stations maybe mounted to your roof and you've got a little console that you can see, those rain gauges are notorious for either over reporting because of maybe wind is kind of shaking the instrument around, or sometimes under reporting. Even in heavy rainfall amounts, the rain dripping through the instrument, the little device inside can't even keep up with heavy rain. So the manual gauge, the one that I was just holding up, is truly the one that is the best in the business to be able to get an accurate reading.
And Noah, I have now these maps that have, again, the dots all over the United States of America. Once you post that data, it looks like you can go on the website and see that your data is up here pretty quickly.
More or less immediately. You can get to our map and look at your dot on the map. As you look at those right there, and you see, like, maybe in the state of Nebraska and Kansas, we've got all those dots that don't really have any colors to them. Those are zeros. Those are people that woke up, checked their gauge, and told us that they got nothing, which is actually really good data. That's extremely valuable. We've got drought scientists that are looking at where it did not rain, and so they want to verify. They may have seen a radar image showing that rain was potentially falling in a certain area, but it's the volunteers on the ground that can verify if those raindrops actually hit the ground or not.
And Noah, I hear you on the zero report. I actually wrote a program once that was trying to pull in CoCoRa's data, and when the zero was not reported and it went in as missing, that made things much more complicated. So yes, report zero, even though it seems like it doesn't matter. It is very, very critical. Another graphic here shows what we were talking about before, how important this is for snowpacks, measuring snowfall and snow observations.
Right, and snow gets a little bit more complicated. With this gauge, the funnel and the inner tube that are used to measure to the nearest 1/100th of an inch of liquid, you need to take those out, and you let the snow fall into your outer cylinder here all by itself. And then after the snow falls in here, you bring it inside, you melt it, and you pour it into your inner tube to figure out how much water is in your snow. So that's really valuable data. It's also a little bit more tricky and takes a little bit more time. So we don't require our volunteers to measure snow. If you're just a rain person, you don't like the cold weather, you can participate during the rainy season and quit during the snow. But of course, those who are dedicated and submit their snow information, that is extremely valuable, again, to the National Weather Service, the River Forecast Centers, the snow analysis folks at NOAA. They all heavily use CoCoRa's data.
That's great. And Noah, I know we're up against a break. I did want to cover one more topic, so I'm going to ask my producer, Katie, can we take another few minutes? Yes, it sounds like we can. All right, so I wanted to get into a specific Arizona example because this is really, really cool. I looked this up yesterday. So on September, let's see, I wrote this down. Yeah, September 26th, we had a record 1.64 inches at Sky Harbor Airport, which here in the desert in Phoenix, that is quite a lot. But you could see not all stations had that exact same amount. Some were more, some were less. And by the way, and Noah, you could speak to this. So at the top, it actually says September 27th. The reason that it says that is that the reports are usually measured the next morning. But Noah, this is just fascinating. You've got amounts, Camelback East, 1.65 inches, but then we go over into Scottsdale and we've got amounts almost 3 inches. I've got a 2.85 there just south of Scottsdale and north of Tempe.
This just goes to show that rain does not fall the same on all. The official reading from the airport is just one reading, but as we all know, we've looked out our window during a event. You can watch it raining across the street and not on you. So the variability it displays well on those maps. And yeah, that's some big rains that fell on that day. You're absolutely right, though. Everyone takes their reading basically first thing in the morning. We, if the morning time is not your jam, all we ask is that you stay consistent. So if 2 p.m. works for you, then read your gauge every day at 2 p.m. and the National Weather Service can use that data. But in broad terms, the anytime between 4:30 in the morning and 9:30 in the morning, so a 2.5 hour window on the each side of 7 a.m. is most ideal for the National Weather Service. All throughout history, they've been doing their precipitation measurements basically at 7 a.m. local time.
Do you ever get excuses and notes from people online that say, hey, you know, I got to take my dog to the vet. I'm not feeling so well. I want to post a little bit later in the morning, kind of like maybe someone would do as an excuse not to come into work or go to school?
Sure, yeah, no, and of course, you can read your gauge at 7 a.m. and then you go off to work or school, and maybe if you forgot to enter your data, you can always go back later and enter that data and say, hey, I read my gauge at 7 a.m. and this is what it was. Or, hey, I read my gauge today at 10 a.m. and here's what I had. So you can enter that on your form, and you can also include notes, and that always helps.
Noah, thanks so much for joining us and for your time. I think people will learn a lot from this. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, we will take a short break and be right back with our second guest. All right, welcome back to Sonoran Sky Live. We covered ground observations, and that's really the topic of today's show. We're going to talk about things that we can measure on the ground and also up in the sky. And I thought, why not bring in someone who is both a meteorologist and a former pilot to talk about this? I want to welcome in Nick Shorjay. Thanks for being on Sonoran Sky Live.
Hello, Pete, and thanks for having me out here. Really exciting, very interesting, and a big shout out to Noah, too, and the CocoRoz Network. I only wish CocoRoz was around back when I was a little kid getting interested in meteorology. I was kind of thinking of something here because I'm hungry. I'm a little under the weather, but I'm getting better. I'm thinking peanut butter and chocolate. I'm thinking beer and pizza, not necessarily in that order, hot dogs and apple pie. What are all these things? What do they all have in common? They are symbiotic. They go together. And that's what I think of when I think of aviation and meteorology. You really can't have one without the other, from the earliest days of aviation history to where we are today. And, how you can do one without the other is almost impossible. And you had asked me before I was able to come along for this interview, what got me going on with some of this stuff and what inspired me. And I really don't know. I guess I'm one of those very few lucky people who can say that I did not choose to fly airplanes and become a meteorologist. It chose me. if that makes any sense. And let me know if I start rambling on, guide me back onto the guardrail if we have to. But a little story about where I come from. I was born in Chicago back in 1960s. So you young whippersnappers will have to listen to my old talking here. But seriously, when I was a little kid, I was born on the north side of Chicago. We lived on the top apartment of an old balloon frame house. Balloon frame houses are basically those wooden houses with the A-shaped roof on top. My grandparents owned the house, and we lived on the third floor. And we had a little breakfast nook that had lots of windows. Being able to see outside is very important if you want to know more about the weather, and that's a true thing there. And across the street from us was our church, and it was one of those old Gothic churches with a big steeple on top. And we were close enough to Lake Michigan that when the wind blew the right way after a storm system, you couldn't see the top of the steeple. And as a little kid, I remember asking myself, well, what happened to the steeple? What's it like in those clouds? What can I do to get up there? And right around the same time, we're talking 1962 to 64, there was a TV series called The Whirlybirds. This was a TV series on CBS that had to do with helicopters and helicopter pilots. And suddenly I realized there was something that could get me into the air to be with this stuff and to learn more about it and everything else, or just to enjoy it as a little kid. That's all I was interested in. And lo and behold, in 1964, August 23rd, my folks took me on a vacation with my grandparents to the Badlands of South Dakota, where they gave, and they still do to this day, they gave helicopter rides. They sold them out. $15 got my mom, my dad, and me inside, and that's me right there
Wait,
with my
Nick, did
fingers in my hair.
you went on that thing?
Yes, I was getting ready to climb in. Back in the day, it
Wow.
was only $15 for a helicopter ride. Nowadays, it's a lot more. It was only a couple minutes long, but that's when the bug bit me. And that's a term that a lot of us who fly airplanes use. And it was actually attributed originally to Orville Wright when he wrote to another guy named Octave Chanute, who was studying gliders. And he was also in the Chicago area. And he said, I have been bitten by the flying bug, and treated it like it was an illness. And I guess it sort of is, because it costs a lot of money. Well, fast forward into middle school, and I realized that, when your parents are giving you 25 cents a week allowance, that was pretty good. That was a cost of living allowance for kids back in the mid 60s. It's still not enough to take flying lessons. So in middle school, I learned in our science classes that you can take the sky and bring it down to you by building your own weather instruments. And in some cases, going to the hardware store and buying weather instruments like thermometers, a barometer, the little dials that were in our lounges, our bedrooms, and everything. We called it a hygrometer. And Noah could relate to that. Noah Newman, your previous guest, could relate to that. What you wind up doing is you start measuring the atmosphere here on the ground, and you don't have to leave the Earth. It was fascinating to me.
That's cool.
And
Hey,
as I got older,
sorry to cut you off, Nick. We've got about 6 minutes left, and I want to make
yes,
sure we get into kind of the dual career that you had for a while, where you were a
sure,
meteorologist on 9 News
yes,
in Denver. I remember watching
right,
you there. How did you
yeah,
have time
yeah,
to
yeah,
do that, which is kind of a demanding morning gig, and also
sure.
practice flying? Because I imagine that has time demands as well.
I led two lives. That's what happened, because I did the morning weather and did some reporting, but on the side, I wound up teaching people how to fly airplanes. This is a picture from way back when, and it's asking why is my head always in the clouds, and I'm not going to go over that again because I just did. But basically, once we fast forward and got me into meteorology, I came out to Denver in 1984, got back into flying. I learned how to solo, at least in Civil Air Patrol, U.S. Air Force Auxiliary. I would really encourage any parents who have kids or grandkids who might be interested in flying, get them in there. It's good public service. They learn about their community, and they can learn to fly for much less money than what anybody else pays for. Anyway, I went through all the ranks, got all the way up to my airline transport pilot certificate, taught people how to fly. That fulfilled my passion. And then I was still able to do meteorology. And, there's a very interesting thing that a lot of people talk about with meteorology and aviation. Flying. Um, doesn't necessarily make me a better meteorologist, but being a meteorologist made me a better pilot to such an
Interesting.
extent. that I was able to really understand when I would teach people to fly. We always would go over the meteorology side, but I would do it in ways that people can understand. You always want to explain things in ways that people can always relate to. You go from common ground to, untreaded water. For example, if I want to talk about the jet stream and I want to talk about turbulence, let's talk about whitewater rafting. You ever see the bubbling and foam and
Hmm.
all that stuff on the brooks and streams? Well, that's what the jet stream does, which means you're going to have a rough ride.
Nick,
Little things like that.
to that point, sorry to cut you off again. When you were
Sure,
flying, what did you specifically look at to see if you're going to be flying through
sure.
turbulence?
I know we were talking about that kind of stuff. Probably the most common thing, even to this day, for general aviation, even for the airlines, is simply what we call the PIREP. PIREP is a contraction term for pilot report. If you ever get a chance to, and I don't think they do this anymore, but you fly in commercial airlines and they sometimes plug up your earbuds. They give you those little things where you can always, take these things and you can put them
Yep.
in your ears and listen to what's going on. The pilots will often say, "Hey, Denver Center, blah, 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 1, 2, 3, how are the rides up there?" And what we're asking air traffic control is, has anybody reported anything unusual or strange? And we can look at different services, different products. The National Weather Service now has aviation weather. UCAR, University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, up in Boulder, Colorado, not far from me, has products that people can look at. And we now find a much more savvy population. You guys, younger guys, have a much better understanding meteorological products than we did when I was in high school or in college or even fresh off of school and into the real world. We had what was called, and they still exist, the Flight Service Facility. We call them Flight Service Stations or FSS. When I was a kid, I thought that's where they, clean the windows and take your credit card and put gas in your plane. But no, Flight Service was actually a branch of the FAA that would give you weather briefings before you flew. Because when you fly, by sole reference to the instruments, you can't see where you're going, you must get a weather briefing. You want to know what the weather forecast is going to be like an hour before to an hour after your arrival time, and you want to be able to have at least a certain visibility and certain cloud height above the ground. If not, you have to plan for a different airport to land at. These are
Did you
safeguards
ever
that
have
are
a
brought
time?
into the product.
Did you ever have a time where you looked at the forecast and thought, "Ooh, I'm going to fly, but I'm a little concerned"? Like, what was the scariest weather you ever flew in?
Every time. And the scariest time that I ever flew in was when I was heading down to Arizona. Big shout out to my folks in Sun City, by the way. There was a whole group of us that wanted to fly down to I want to say it was South Phoenix. It was near Chandler. I had some friends who were freshly retired, and we had a cold front that moved in, cold air up against high ground just south of Denver. It socked us in. This is a terrible mea culpa story because the statutes of limitations had passed. I took off heading southeast, and the cloud ceiling was getting lower and lower. I was instrument rated, but the temperatures were cold enough that it could have iced up the wings on my airplane. Very bad thing to happen. So I was flying below the cloud layer in open country, following a road, and all of a sudden I see this little sliver of light. And I was getting a little concerned. The proper thing to do, had I lost sight of the ground, was to climb, confess, communicate, and comply with the air traffic control people and saying, "I just got into this layer of clouds. Can you help me get to Colorado Springs, where it was sunny?" I saw a thin sliver of light, and I said, "I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to keep on going. It's getting better." All of a sudden, that sliver of light, it was only about this big, got bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, I saw what I thought was a welder's torch off to my right. It was the sun reflecting off the chapel of the Air Force Academy. And then I knew I was home free. And that's when I lost about 5 pounds in 20 minutes and got my senses back. Made it to Arizona. We went to a great German restaurant on the south end of town. There's a really good German restaurant in Glendale. I'm not endorsing any products, but they were really, really good. And I had the best tasting Wiener Schnitzel that night and the best tasting war stories. But you don't want that to happen because remember, in aviation, there are old pilots, bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots.
I love that. I imagine you were still riding the adrenaline after that rough plane ride when you were at the German restaurant. Do you know what the name is, by the way? Maybe it's still around.
Let's see. The one that was down south, no. And I forgot the one that's in Glendale is House Murphy. And I learned about that back when there was a glider airport up in Peoria. It was called Turf Soaring School. It's all developed now, it's all buildings. But if ever you want to know where the best German restaurants are in a certain location, go to the glider port because there's always some German guy who flew in Germany, because in Germany they love gliders and there's a long history, the Gleitflügel. And I just said, anybody know any good German restaurants? And all of a sudden, yeah, you go to House Murphy. And I thought that was kind of a joke, but it's actually in Glendale. Great place. I hope they're still
All
around.
right. You know what, Nick? We're going to do that research. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
You bet.
Loved hearing your stories.
So much more, Pete. There's so much more I wish I could have told you, Pete, but the products have changed. Nowadays, pilots can actually get stuff downloaded from their computer. They can Wi-Fi it to their airplanes. In the old days, we had to write it down. We had to talk to a briefer. Those days are long gone. But meteorology, beer and pizza, Wurst und Sausage und Bier, same thing, peanut butter and chocolate, they go together. You can't have one without the other.
Nick, thanks so much for being on Sonoran Sky Live. Great to talk to you.
You betcha, Pete.
All right, so two great guests there. We had observing weather from the ground with the CocoRa's network and a former pilot and still current meteorologist talking about air observations. We'll see you next week on Sonoran Sky Live.